It happened on a night that smelled like rain and endings, the kind of night where the highway glistens under street lamps and the world feels like it's caught between breaths. Daniel Marlowe had just closed another high-stakes deal, smiled, his fake CEO smile over steak and scotch, and was halfway home, lost in the kind of tired silence only a single father really understands. The road had twisted through the hills like a slow sigh, and the farther he drove, the darker it got, until the fog swallowed everything but the rumble of his Range Rover and the thoughts he didn't want to face. Then he saw it. Not headlights, not another car, smoke, not drifting peacefully like a chimney's sigh, but bellowing, black and frantic, reaching fingers toward the trees. It poured from a ravine just off the side of the road, too thick to ignore, too sudden to explain. Instinct overtook him. He slammed the brakes, heart already pounding, tires skidding on slick gravel as he yanked the wheel and followed the smoke. Down an unmarked path. That's when he heard the screaming, not loud, not constant, but raw and human and cracking through the air like lightning. It cut through the roar of fire and engine begging to be heard. Daniel ran. He didn't think, didn't lock his car, didn't check his phone. He ran down the slope, where the smoke got thicker, where the trees bent backward in fear, and where the fire glowed red like an open wound in the world. The car was already burning. Flames licked the hood and crackled beneath shattered windows. Something inside popped like metal snapping, and he nearly ducked before he heard it again. That scream, high-pitched, desperate. He threw himself at the nearest door. It wouldn't budge. Heat burned his skin through his blazer. Inside, through smoke-stained glass, he saw her. Face against the window, a white dress darkened with soot, hands bound in chains like a medieval prisoner. Her eyes found his, and then she screamed again. Daniel didn't think. He backed up, grabbed a rock, and smashed the window in one furious motion. Glass shattered, and fire spat at him like it was angry. He reached in, grabbing her shoulders, coughing as the smoke clawed at his lungs, and pulled. She didn't weigh much, but the chains dragged. He had to jerk them, snapping the last length that had twisted under a seat as the heat blistered his hands. He got her out just seconds before the gas tank went up. The blast knocked him sideways. The heat washed over them both like a tidal wave. He rolled with her under him, shielding her body, his ears ringing with the thunder of the explosion. When he lifted his head, she was unconscious. Her skin was slick with soot. Her lips were cracked. Her dress, what remained of it, was stained with blood, oil, and ash. But she was alive. He carried her uphill, back to his car. His mind raced through. Options, hospital, police. But something stopped him. The chains, the way they looked hand-welded, the wild, unfocused terror in her eyes before she passed out. No. Something about this wasn't right. Daniel called Dr. Rourke, a discreet private physician who had been treating his family for years. Then he drove, fast and silent, toward his lake house, half an hour out from the city, tucked behind trees where the wind whispered but never screamed. Inside, he laid her down in the guest room and collapsed into a chair, staring at his burned hands, her charred dress, and wondering what on earth he had just brought into his home. Morning arrived like an accusation. Rain tapped the windows, gently washing the soot from the glass as though erasing the night before. Dr. Rourke had bandaged the woman's wrists and given her a sedative. Her vitals were stable. Her body was bruised, but miraculously unbroken. Still, Daniel sat in the hallway outside the room, unable to sleep, head in his hands. He wasn't a man who invited chaos. Not anymore. Not since he'd buried his wife, Anna, 3 years ago. Not since he promised Lily he'd always keep her safe. Footsteps interrupted his spiral, small, pajamaed ones. "Daddy?" Lily, 6 years old, hair like her mother's, stood blinking in the hallway. "Who's that lady?" Daniel tried to smile, but it felt like cracked porcelain. "Someone who needed help." "Is she okay?" "I think so. She looked like a princess." He blinked. "What?" She's wearing a dress, like a wedding dress. But it's all dirty. Is she a princess that got cursed? Daniel didn't have an answer. He just pulled his daughter into his lap and kissed her forehead. Maybe we're helping her break it. Lily nodded seriously. Okay, I'll help too. And just like that, the night before wasn't over. It was just the beginning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when these stories find you. Because this one doesn't end in the fire. It starts there. When she woke up, the silence around her didn't make sense. The last thing she remembered was fire, crackling, screaming, her own voice swallowed by it, chains biting into her skin, a man's voice shouting something she couldn't hear over the heat. Then nothing, just blackness. Now, there was a ceiling, soft, white, not smoke-stained or collapsing. The air didn't burn. It smelled faintly of lavender and rain. She blinked again. The bed beneath her was firm but clean. Sheets, a blanket, a window showing gray skies and trees that swayed gently in the wind. Where was she? The room had the kind of stillness that whispered safety, but it didn't feel real. She sat up too quickly. Pain roared through her wrists. She gasped, gripping them, bandaged, stiff. Panic flared again in her chest, wild and uncontainable, until the door creaked open, and he was there, the man from the fire. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing blistered hands still wrapped in gauze. His dark hair was messy, and there was exhaustion in his eyes, but also a calm, anchored strength. He stepped in slowly, hands visible, like approaching a wounded animal. "You're safe," he said softly. "My name's Daniel. You're in my home." She stared at him, words caught in her throat. "I found you," he continued, "in a car off the service road. It was burning. You were chained inside." The images came back like claws, metal, firelight, screaming. Her body shuddered. She looked down at her wrists again. "Chains," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "You don't have to explain anything. You don't even have to talk if you don't want to. I want you to rest. You're safe here." She didn't know how to believe him, but her body gave her no choice. Every muscle ached. Her skin buzzed from dehydration. She nodded slowly, cautiously. The silence stretched between them. "I'll get you some water," he said, retreating quietly. When he returned, he brought more than water. A bowl of broth, crackers, a mug of warm tea. He didn't ask questions. He just set them down, adjusted the pillows behind her gently, and sat nearby, giving her space. She reached for the tea, hands trembling. Her voice rasped when she finally found it. What day is it?" "Saturday." She flinched, confused. "Do you know what day you last remember?" She hesitated. "I don't know." Daniel watched her. "Do you remember your name?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came. She shook her head, slow and helpless. "That's okay," he said, no judgment in his tone. "We'll figure it out." There was a pause. Then she said quietly, "I remember bells, church bells, loud, and smoke." She looked down at her dress, once white, now a horror of stains and tears. "I was getting married, I think." Daniel's breath caught, but he said nothing. "And someone said, 'She's perfect.'" Then it went dark. She touched her ring finger, bare, bruised. Then again. She did it twice more before realizing what she was doing. Daniel noticed too. He didn't press further. Later that morning, Lily peeked into the room again. The woman saw her and froze. Children don't belong in nightmares. But Lily, unfazed, walked straight up to her bedside and offered her a stuffed bunny with a missing ear. "Hi," Lily said. "You can borrow him. He helps with nightmares." The woman blinked hard. "Thank you. What's your name?" She hesitated, then whispered, "I don't know." Lily looked thoughtful. That's okay. You can have a name for now. I think you look like an L. Daniel opened his mouth to correct her, but the woman smiled, faintly. L, that sounds nice. See? Lily grinned. Told you I'm good at naming. Daniel let the moment sit, unsure of what it meant to give someone a name that wasn't theirs. But in the hush of the morning, it felt like grace. That evening, Elle sat up for dinner. Daniel made something simple: roast chicken, rice, and steamed carrots. She ate slowly but without fear. He didn't ask more questions, though 1,000 were bubbling beneath his skin. Later, after Lily had gone to bed with her bunny beside her, Daniel stood outside the guest room, hesitating. Then he knocked gently. Ella opened the door, backlit by the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Just wanted to check in, he said. She nodded. Thank you for everything. He almost said, you're welcome, but it felt too shallow, so he just nodded. I was supposed to be married, she said suddenly, voice distant. Daniel stiffened. I remember a man, red hair, cold eyes. He wasn't happy, but he smiled too much. It didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a sentence. Daniel felt something tighten in his gut. Did you say no? I think I screamed. Then I woke up in fire. Her hands drifted to her wrists again. He hesitated, then offered quietly, Do you want me to call? The police? She looked at him, panic flashing in her eyes. No, not yet. I don't know who to be afraid of. Daniel nodded. Okay, then we don't call. Not until you're ready. She exhaled in relief, and something fragile passed between them. A thread of trust that hadn't been there hours before. He left her then, but sleep didn't come easily. Not for him and not for her, because somewhere, in the dark spaces between memory and fear, they both knew one thing: whoever had chained Elle into that car hadn't expected her to survive, and whoever he wasn't done. The nightmares came in waves. Elle would wake in cold sweats, sometimes clawing at the sheets, sometimes crying without sound. Daniel started keeping a blanket and pillow on the hallway bench just outside her room. Not because he expected her to need him, but because he couldn't sleep knowing she might. Sometimes she didn't scream, but he could still hear her, through the wall, in the silence, in the way grief echoes even when it has no name. 3 days passed like smoke curling through a closed room. Quiet, heavy, unshakable. She didn't remember her name, but she began to move more freely. Every morning, she helped Lily pick out clothes, tie her shoes, and braid her hair into odd little ropes Lily called magic tangles. Ella started humming without realizing it. Soft, sad melodies that reminded Daniel of lullabies from other people's childhoods. But every time the wind caught the lake chimes hanging on the back porch, she flinched. Her hand would drift unconsciously to her finger, the ring finger. The first time Daniel noticed, he didn't say anything. The third time, he asked gently, You remember being married? She shook her head. I remember a dress, heavy, lace. It made it hard to breathe. I remember someone fixing my veil, a woman with long nails. She said I was lucky, that he'd chosen me. Daniel frowned. Do you remember who she meant? Elle looked at him, eyes glassy. No, but I know it wasn't love. It felt like being sold. The air went still. That evening, Daniel brought out a sketch pad. I've got someone coming tomorrow, he said. A friend of mine. Used to do composite sketches for the FBI. Thought maybe if you can describe things, we can put a face together. Elle nodded slowly, staring at the blank page, like it might hold answers she'd forgotten how to ask for. The next morning, the man arrived, a calm, older artist named Theo, who had eyes that never judged and hands that moved like water. I don't want to pressure you, Daniel told her before Theo started. We stop whenever you say stop. Ella sat at the breakfast table, while Lily watched cartoons in the other room, and with trembling lips, she began to describe him. Red hair, she said first. Not ginger, darker, auburn, slicked back like old movie stars. And he always smiled, but it never reached his eyes. Theo drew silently, patiently, letting her words shape lines and shadows. Sharp cheekbones, a scar on his temple, always in a dark suit even when it was hot. There was a tattoo on his hand, a crest. Maybe I saw it when he put the ring on me. Daniel's blood turned to ice. A crest, Ella nodded. 3 swords, or maybe they were snakes. It was gold, like it was rich. Theo worked until her voice gave out. When the sketch was done, she stared at it like it might come to life and reach through the page. "That's him," she whispered. Daniel scanned the drawing, feeling a chill run through his veins. There was something familiar in that face, a corporate arrogance, a cruel kind of confidence. He stepped into his study, closed the door, and called in a favor. "Zane, I need you to run a search on missing women. Anyone reported around the Tri-County area in the last 6 months who matches L's description, and cross-reference that face. He might not be in the system, but look for ties to known families, old money, hidden money." Zane, his personal cyber investigator, gave a low whistle. "Sounds messy." "It is." That night, Daniel walked past Ella's room and saw her sitting by the window, arms wrapped around her knees. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. She didn't look at him. "Do you ever feel like you exist in someone else's nightmare?" He stepped inside, gently closing the door behind him. "I felt like I'm still trapped in one." She turned to him, eyes wide. "Your wife?" He nodded. "Anna. Cancer. Fast and cruel. One moment she was arguing with me about school lunch, Minus, and the next I was holding her hand while machines kept her breathing." Ella exhaled shakily. "And Lily?" "She was 4. She remembers more than she says." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Ella whispered, "Sometimes I think I'm not supposed to remember. That it'd be better if I didn't." Daniel looked at her hands, still bruised, still healing. "But if you don't remember, he wins." She looked at him, startled. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. The next day, the first lead came in. Zane had found a wedding venue reservation, cancelled last minute, booked under a false name, but linked to a credit card belonging to Royce Halden. Daniel's stomach sank. Royce Halden, son of Stanton Halden, former rival in a tech merger gone sour. The Haldens had money buried in places even accountants couldn't reach, and Stanton's son had always been known for reckless deals, lavish parties, and women who left crying. Zane's voice cut in. "Here's the creepy part. No records of a marriage. No bride registry, no public announcement, and get this, 3 different women who were last seen near Halden properties have since disappeared. But none of them were ever reported missing." Daniel's knuckles turned white. "Because no one knew they were gone." Exactly. That night, while tucking Lily into bed, Elle sat beside her and hummed the tune she always hummed, until the nearby church bell, a mile across the lake, rang its hour. Elle dropped the book she was holding. She clutched her arms, shaking. Daniel caught her before she collapsed. When she came to, she was gasping. The bells. He rang them before he walked in. Daniel helped her sit. "Ella, he's not here." But she wasn't listening. She looked at her hands again, her ring finger, and this time she said something new. "I said no. I screamed no. He told them to chain me anyway." Daniel felt rage crawl through his spine like fire. The man who did this wasn't just cruel. He wasn't just sick. He had taken her choice, and that made this war. The days started to blur. Ella found a rhythm. Slow mornings, quiet breakfasts with Lily, moments of calm tucked between long shadows of memory. But the cracks in that calm deepened. She stopped humming. Her gaze drifted more often, lost in corners of the room that held no answers. And Daniel, Daniel noticed everything. He saw how she avoided mirrors, how she flinched when the coffee machine hissed too loud, how she wore long sleeves even on warm days, as if hiding the evidence of something no one should have to carry. One night, Daniel found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the lake. The stars above were blurred behind low clouds, and the wind had a bite that hinted at rain. He brought a second cup of tea and sat beside her, saying nothing. After a while, she spoke. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away, just sipped his tea and stared out into the same darkness she was. "Because when I was drowning in my own grief, someone helped me breathe again. They didn't ask why I was broken, they just sat with me like this." Elle looked at him, her eyes glassy but sharp. "But I'm not your problem. You're not a problem, Elle. You're a person. A human being someone tried to erase." She was silent for a while. Then, almost in a whisper, "I keep remembering pieces, sounds, smells, a song I danced to once, the taste of peppermint, but not names, not mine, not his." Daniel gently reached for her hand, resting it between both of his. "You'll get there." The next morning, Zane called again. This time, his voice had a different edge. "Got something weird. A private estate outside Milford. One of Holden's shell companies bought it 2 years ago. No records of what goes on there. But satellite images show several cars coming and going, always at night." Daniel's jaw clenched. "You think that's where he took her?" "I think it's where he takes them." Daniel knew what came next couldn't involve cops. Not yet. Not with how deep the Haldens ran in the system. They owned half the politicians in 3 counties. Calling the authorities could mean tipping. Royce off, and Ella disappearing again permanently. He hung up and turned to Elle. "I need to ask you something hard, and I need you to trust me." She sat straighter, nerves flaring in her chest. "Okay. Do you remember a house? A big one, with gates, maybe woods around it?" Her hands started shaking. "Yes," she whispered. "White pillars, black iron fence, music always playing, but it never sounded happy." Daniel nodded slowly. "There's a room," she added, her voice thinning. "Velvet curtains, and a mirror with no glass, just metal, cold metal." He watched from behind it. Daniel inhaled sharply. "A one-way mirror?" She nodded. "He made me try on dresses, told me to walk, smile, spin." Daniel's tea mug shattered on the floor. Ella jumped. "I'm sorry," he said, standing quickly. "That's not about you, that's about him." She watched him, startled. He looked so composed most of the time. Seeing him this raw felt like an earthquake. "I need to go see something," he muttered, already grabbing his jacket. "I won't be long." But he was gone for hours, and when he came back he was different. There was blood on his knuckles and a tremble in his jaw he couldn't hide. Ella didn't ask, he didn't offer. Instead, he leaned against the kitchen counter and said, "Royce Holden isn't just a predator. He's building something, a system, maybe even a network. That house, it's not just his." Ella's voice was barely audible. "What do you mean?" "He's not the only one watching behind the glass." The silence that followed swallowed the room whole. Daniel kept going. "I think you were chosen, or bought, or both." Elle covered her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. "But you got out," he said firmly. "You lived, and you're not just a victim, Elle. You're a witness." That night, Lily came to sleep in Ella's bed. She didn't say why, just curled up next to her and whispered, "I don't like when the wind howls." Elle held her close, and when the wind did howl, long and low through the trees and the window panes, Elle didn't flinch. She stared straight into the dark and said, "I'm not afraid of you." In the morning, Daniel made pancakes. Lily insisted on chocolate chips, and Elle, after some hesitation, added whipped cream with a little grin. But the light didn't last long. Zane sent a file through, encrypted email. It contained receipts, property records, bank trails, and something worse, photos. Ella opened the folder. There she was, standing in that velvet-curtained room, wearing white, Staring at the camera, eyes dull, a voice came back to her, clear and cold. "Smile, darling. You're perfect when you're still." She slammed the laptop shut and ran to the bathroom. Daniel followed, but paused at the door. He waited until she opened it herself, red-eyed but fierce. "I want to burn it down," she said. Daniel didn't flinch. "Then let's plan the fire." That night, they sat on the living room floor with printouts, maps, and markers. Ella circled windows she remembered, drew paths she thought she took. Together, they traced a plan, and somewhere between adrenaline and horror, she felt something new rise in her chest. Not fear, not grief, but purpose. Because she wasn't going back to that mirror. She was going to shatter it. The fire wasn't a metaphor anymore. Ella woke before sunrise the next day. Her hands were trembling, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something more primal. Determination. Rage, maybe. The kind that simmers deep in the marrow when you realize someone's been writing your story in ink you never agreed to. Daniel was already in the kitchen, a pot of coffee steaming beside a manila envelope. "Intel," he said simply. "From Zane. Entry points, surveillance patterns, thermal imaging." Elle didn't hesitate. She opened the file and studied it like a woman preparing for war. And in a way, she was. They spent the morning in silence, heads bent over blueprints. Lily stayed at school late for an aftercare activity Daniel had arranged. He didn't want her near what came next. Neither of them spoke about the danger. It was understood, like breathing, like instinct. Daniel pointed to a side wing on the estate layout. "You said the velvet room was here, right? Above the garage?" Elle nodded. "Third floor, south. And there was a room below it too. Cement floors, no windows," he swallowed. "A holding room." She didn't need to confirm it. He looked at her then, really looked. The bruises on her arms had faded to yellow. The burns were healing, but still mapped her skin in pink, sensitive lines. And yet, her eyes had sharpened. The fog that once clouded them was gone. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked. Ella's voice was steady. "He didn't expect me to survive. That means I have something he fears." Daniel nodded. "Then we use it." They geared up, not with weapons. This wasn't a movie. But with flashlights, burner phones, and an escape plan. Daniel packed a small fire starter kit. Ella brought a USB drive they'd loaded with all the damning evidence Zane had found. "If we make it inside," she said, "we upload this to every public server we can hit." Daniel added, "And if we don't make it, Zane hits publish anyway." They set out that evening just before dusk. The estate was 2 hours away, surrounded by woods that pressed close, like they were trying to keep secrets. Daniel parked half a mile down an overgrown fire road. They walked the rest of the way on foot, every twig snap beneath their boots like a thunderclap. By the time they reached the tree line that bordered the Halden estate, the sky had dimmed into a bruised purple. Lights glowed from behind the tall windows. A party? A gathering? Ella shivered. "They always start at dusk," she said. Daniel crouched low. "We go through the service road. There's a maintenance door. If your memory's right, it should be unmonitored." She led the way. At the back of the house, just beyond the covered tennis court, they found the door, exactly where she remembered. It was locked, but Daniel picked it quickly. Inside, the hallway smelled of bleach and old wood. Ella paused, leaning against the wall, her eyes fluttering shut as memories slammed into her. Voices, laughter, the scrape of heels on marble. "Hey," Daniel whispered, touching her arm. "You're not there anymore. You're here. You're free." She nodded once. They moved forward. The house was massive, a maze of ornate corridors and cold, hollow rooms. Every footstep echoed, every chandelier hummed with low, electric menace. They passed the library, the wine cellar, a ballroom with furniture stacked against the walls, like forgotten toys. And then they reached the velvet room. Ella froze. It hadn't changed. Red curtains draped like blood across the tall windows. The mirror, cold, metallic, monstrous, still loomed above the small pedestal in the center, and there, on the wall, hung rows of white dresses, different sizes, different styles. El choked back bile. He kept them like trophies. Daniel stepped beside her. "We record everything." He began filming on the burner phone, every angle, every corner. Ella walked slowly to the pedestal and stared at the mirror. A flash of memory struck her, standing there, heart pounding, while Royce's voice crackled over the intercom. "You're going to make me proud tonight. Smile for the men." She sank to her knees. Daniel rushed forward. "Elle? I remember. Now," she whispered. "He auctioned me." Daniel went still, not just to him, to others. They watched behind that mirror. They placed bids. He said I'd fetch the highest price because I didn't scream. Daniel's hands curled into fists, but just then a sound, footsteps in the hall. They ducked into the velvet curtains and held their breath. 2 men entered, guards in plain clothes. One muttered, "Place still gives me the creeps. Royce wants the new one prepped before the guests arrive." "Where's she from?" "Thailand, I think. Barely speaks English. They'll start the ceremony at midnight." Their voices faded as they walked off. Ella's hands were shaking. "We have to find her, whoever she is." Daniel checked his watch. "We've got maybe 30 minutes before this place fills up." They slipped through the door behind the mirror and found the observation corridor. Rooms lined the hallway, each with a viewing window. Elle couldn't look. She kept her eyes on the ground, moving fast. They found the concrete room on the first floor. A girl sat inside. She looked no older than 17. Dark hair, blank eyes. Her wrists were chained to the floor. Ella gasped. "We have to get her out. Now." Daniel pulled bolt cutters from his bag. He'd brought them on instinct, and clipped the chains. The girl didn't speak, but when Ella held out her hand, she reached for it. "She's in shock," Elle said, "just like I was." "We'll take her to the car, then we'll come back and light the match." They moved fast, retracing their steps. The girl barely made a sound, even when her bare feet scraped the gravel outside. Daniel wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and stashed her safely in the back seat. Elle kissed her forehead before closing the door. Then she turned back to the house. "To the fire," she whispered. Inside, Daniel poured accelerant in. The velvet room, the auction corridor, and down the hallway of locked doors. Ella stood at the pedestal one last time. "Smile for the men," she said, mocking Royce's voice. "I hope they're watching now." She lit the match. The fire roared like a beast long caged. Flames consumed the curtains first, then the wall behind the mirror. Heat warped the glass, turning it black. The dresses melted. The camera above the pedestal sparked and died. They ran. By the time they reached the car, the estate was glowing behind them like a beacon of fury. The girl in the back seat stirred and whispered one word. "Thank you." Ella looked at Daniel, and Daniel, eyes locked on the fire in the rearview mirror, said, "That's for all the women he thought he broke." The drive back was eerily silent. The fire had lit up the woods like a second sunrise. They hadn't waited to watch it burn. To the ground, they couldn't afford to, but the heat still clung to them in their clothes, their skin, the marrow of their bones. The girl in the back seat had finally fallen asleep, curled tight under Daniel's jacket. Her name, they'd learned, was Scene. Elle couldn't stop glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Something about the way the girl held herself, even unconscious, shoulders curled inward, knees drawn up, stabbed at her heart. It was a posture she knew too well. "She's not going to be okay for a while," Ella said softly. "No," Daniel replied, "but she has a chance. That's more than she had yesterday." Ella reached out, gently touching his hand on the gear shift. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away, and for a few quiet miles, the world didn't feel quite so jagged. Back at the lake house, Daniel carried Cyan inside. They laid her in Lily's bed for the night, and Elle sat with her until her breathing deepened, steady and slow. Then she stood, turned, and walked into the kitchen where Daniel waited with 2 mugs of steaming tea. He looked exhausted. So did she. But something between them had shifted, slowly, like tectonic plates grinding after centuries of stillness. "We did it," Elle said, almost in disbelief. "For now," Daniel replied. "But that kind of monster doesn't die with a fire." "Royce Holden's still out there," she nodded. "Then we make him come to us." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to bait him?" "I want to ruin him." Daniel set his mug down. "How?" Ella went to her bag and pulled out the USB drive they hadn't had time to upload. She plugged it into his laptop and opened the files. Video clips, scanned documents, names, accounts, everything Zane had gathered, and more that Elle had remembered or pieced together. She clicked a folder labeled Guests. Daniel's blood ran cold. There were headshots, surveillance footage, emails with coded language but clear intent. And the names, some of them known, judges, business owners, a senator. "They were all there?" he asked. She nodded. "Buyers, watchers, investors." Royce made sure to document everything. Leverage, insurance. Daniel exhaled slowly. This could start a war. "Good," Elle said. "Let it burn." They uploaded the files to a burner cloud account. Zane looped in on a secure line, confirmed receipt, and began prepping for a slow leak to the press. He'd stagger the releases, name by name, over weeks, maybe months. Enough to keep the storm building, enough to smoke Royce out. That night, Elle slept on the couch, not because she didn't trust Daniel, but because she couldn't stand the thought of closing a door. Not yet. Not ever. At 3:14 a.m., Lily padded into the living room, rubbing her eyes. Ella sat up. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lily climbed onto the couch beside her. "Bad dream. There was fire and you were screaming." Ella held her tight. "It's okay. The fire's gone now, I promise." Lily looked up at her. "You're not going to leave, are you?" It struck Elle harder than she expected. She brushed Lily's hair back and whispered, "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." In the days that followed, they kept the girl safe. Cyan didn't speak much, just watched them with wide, haunted eyes. But she followed Elle around the house, like a shadow, ate what Elle made, sat when Elle sat. Trust, Elle realized, didn't come all at once. It came in fragments. In the way Cyan stopped flinching when someone coughed too loudly, in the way she stopped hiding her hands beneath the table. One afternoon, Cyan came into the kitchen and tapped Ella's wrist. "You?" Elle smiled gently. "Me? My name?" Cyan nodded. "I'm Elle." The girl pointed at herself. "Cyan." Ella crouched, met her eyes. "You're safe here, Cyan. No one will hurt you." Daniel watched from the hallway, arms crossed, something in his throat threatening to break loose. That night, the first press leak hit. A local news blog ran the headline, "Anonymous source alleges human trafficking network tied to prominent families." The article didn't name Royce Holden, not yet, but it named the shell company that owned the estate, and it published stills from the surveillance footage. The story went viral within hours. By morning, it was on every major news outlet. Daniel's phone buzzed non-stop, Zane updating him, reporters trying to sniff around, bots pushing disinformation. But it was the text from an unknown number that changed everything. "You think you've won. I built this world. You're a flea on my skin." Rel read it over his shoulder and said, "He's scared." Daniel turned to her. "Or he's planning something." They spent the next 48 hours fortifying the lake house. Zane installed hidden cameras around the perimeter. Daniel checked the fire alarms, reinforced the locks. He even buried a burner phone with a panic message coded to send their location to 5 trusted allies if something went wrong. Ella asked Lily to stay with Daniel's sister for a few days. She told her it was a vacation, packed her backpack, with art supplies and a stuffed rabbit named Marbles. As Lily left, she turned to Elle and said, "Come back soon, okay?" Elle hugged her hard. "I will." It was late that night when the security system chirped. Daniel froze. Elle looked up from the couch. Then another beep, camera 3, side yard. Daniel brought up the feed on his phone. A man stood near the tree line, dressed in black, face hidden by the shadows, just watching. Elle stepped beside him, her breath caught. "I know that stance," she whispered. "That's him." Daniel didn't move. "He's baiting us." Then, "We don't bite," Elle said. "We bleed him dry." But when they checked the footage again an hour later, the man was gone. All that remained was a white envelope nailed to a tree. Daniel retrieved it at dawn. Inside was a single Polaroid, Edel, from behind the mirror, standing still, eyes dead, and scrawled in pen beneath it, "I want her back." Elle didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just said, "He doesn't get to want anything anymore." And then she burned the photo in the sink. The forest was holding its breath. That's how it felt the next morning, like the trees were waiting, watching, every pine needle and leaf stiff with some silent tension that pulsed underneath the wind. Elle stood on the porch with a cup of coffee she wasn't drinking, staring at the place where the envelope had been nailed to the tree. She hadn't told Lily about the photo, about the message. She didn't have to. Kids like Lily understood when something in the air shifted, like animals before a storm. Inside, Sayen was drawing quietly at the kitchen table. She'd taken to sketching with the colored pencils Elle had left out. Mostly flowers, some faces, one of a rabbit with enormous eyes. Sometimes she tore up the drawings immediately after finishing them. Sometimes she folded them neatly and tucked them under her plate like a secret. Daniel walked up beside Ella, holding his own untouched mug. "Zane says Holden left the country." She didn't answer. "He flew out of New York under a false passport. Kenya, then Germany, then disappeared from tracking. Could be anywhere." Elle finally looked at him. "He'll come back. They always do when they think you've forgotten." Daniel's jaw tensed. "I haven't forgotten. I see his face every time I close my eyes." She reached over and took his hand. "You and me both." That evening, Zane called with something new. "A name," he said through static, "from the guest list. One who didn't know how deep he was in it. Said he just attended a few parties. Claimed he didn't know what they were really about." Elle didn't believe that for a second, but she listened. "Name's Clark Everingham, tech consultant. Has a condo in Manhattan and a lake home in the Berkshires. I pushed him. He broke faster than I expected. Said Holden used to keep trophies, tapes." Daniel's blood went cold. "Tapes of what?" Zane didn't answer immediately. Elle filled the silence. "Of the auctions, the girls." "Yeah," Zane finally said, "and worse." They both knew what he meant. Zane went on. "Everingham said Royce always kept a backup. Analog, old school, in case digital files got compromised. Stored them somewhere quiet, off-grid. Said he once heard Royce call it the iron box." Daniel leaned forward. "Where is it?" "Didn't. No, but he said Royce mentioned a woman once, an archivist, lives in a rehab church in upstate Vermont. He called her his dark librarian." Ella blinked. "Is that a joke?" "I don't think so," Zane said grimly. "He said she wore a veil, said she never asked questions, just catalogued whatever he brought her." Daniel was already pulling up a map. "That's our next move." Elle turned to him. "We can't bring Cyan." "No," he agreed. "I'll call Harper, my sister. She can come get her. She's good with kids." "And Lily?" "She's staying with Harper already. I'll ask her to keep them both until we're done." Until we're done. Ella liked how that sounded. Final, finished, like this chapter of her life had an actual end waiting, and she was going to write it herself. The next morning, Harper arrived in a jeep full of stuffed animals and snacks. Zayen didn't resist. She let Harper take her hand, though she glanced back at Elle with wide eyes. Elle crouched and kissed her cheek. "You're safe, little one. We'll be back." Cyan hesitated, then reached into her sweater and handed. Elle folded drawing. Elle opened it. It was a picture of the lake house, and all three of them, Elle, Daniel and Cyan, standing in front of it, smiling. Elle swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thank you." Harper gave Daniel a long look before driving off. "Don't die, okay?" He gave a grim smile. "We'll try." The drive to Vermont was long and quiet. The roads wound through dense woods and sleepy towns that looked like they belonged on postcards. Snow flurried now and then, dusting the windshield in soft spirals. They didn't talk much. The silence between them had shifted, less about fear, more about focus. When they arrived, the church loomed out of the trees like a forgotten monument. Tall steeple, blackened windows. The doors were carved oak, heavy and scarred by time. Daniel parked under a collapsed bell tower. "You ready?" he asked. Ella nodded. "Let's finish this." They entered through a side door. The inside smelled like dust, wax and something older. Paper and mold and silence. It wasn't a church anymore. Not really. The pews had been ripped out. In their place stood shelves, floor to ceiling packed with labeled boxes. Footsteps echoed from above. They turned to see her descending the old staircase. She wore a long black dress and a lace veil over her face. Her voice, when it came, was smooth, empty. "I wondered when someone would come for his sins." Elle stared. "You're her, the archivist." "I am what the dead leave behind," she said softly, "and what the guilty never retrieve." Daniel stepped forward. "We want the iron box." The woman nodded. "He said you might come, eventually, the one he failed to break." Elle felt her skin crawl. "Where is it?" "Below," she said. "But understand, once you open it, the story owns you." Elle didn't flinch. "It already does." They followed her down a spiral staircase carved into stone. The air grew colder, staler. At the bottom, the woman stopped before a vault. Indoor with a rusted wheel, she pressed her palm to a scanner. The lock clicked. "You have 1 hour," she said. "After that, this place seals itself. It's how he wanted it." Ella pushed the door open. Inside, the iron box wasn't a container. It was a room, steel-lined, humid with decay. Dozens of shelves, tape reels, cassettes, Polaroids in plastic sleeves, and a single leather-bound ledger sitting on a pedestal like a Bible. Daniel moved first, filming everything. Elle approached the ledger and opened it. Names, prices, dates. Her name was there. Number 109. Next to it, high yield, no resistance, untouched. She almost vomited, but she didn't stop. They worked quickly, scanning, photographing, uploading, every minute precious. At the 53-minute mark, the floor above groaned. They froze. Footsteps. The archivist hadn't moved. "Time's almost up," Daniel whispered. "Go. I'll hold." "The door." "No," Elle said. "We leave together." She grabbed the ledger. He stuffed the last reel into his bag. At the 59-minute mark, they burst into the stairwell. The door behind them slammed shut. The archivist was gone. Back outside, they barely made it to the car before a drone buzzed low overhead. Daniel looked up. "We've been tracked." He floored the jeep. As they tore through the woods, Elle looked back at the church and whispered, "He knows we have it now." The sky was bleeding by the time they hit the state line. A bruised orange faded into gray, chased by the shadow of something neither of them could shake. The feeling that they were being hunted. The forest behind them was no longer just trees. It felt like the jaws of something ancient, something closing. Daniel didn't slow the jeep, not once. The iron box, now locked inside a military-grade case, sat at Ella's feet. She hadn't spoken in over an hour. Her hands were still smudged with ink from the ledger, and she hadn't stopped shaking. He reached over once, brushed her thigh. Elle, she blinked. You with me? She nodded slowly. Yeah, just trying not to come apart. He didn't say, it's okay if you do, she wouldn't believe it, and he knew better than to offer comfort wrapped in pity. So instead he said, come apart when we win. She looked over at him. Deal. They crossed into New Hampshire just after midnight. Daniel pulled off the highway and took the old logging roads that wrapped like veins around the edge of the White Mountains. Zane had a secure site there, a cabin wired into satellite and independent power, run mostly on solar and paranoia. When they arrived, the door opened before Daniel even cut the engine. Zane stepped out in a hoodie and jeans, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot. Get inside. Now. Inside, the place was a fortress. Server racks in the kitchen, drones on the counter, a coffee pot duct taped to the wall. The kind of organized chaos only someone with no sleep and too much brain could live in. Elle dropped the case onto the table with a thud. We found the iron box. Zane didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then softly, no one's ever touched this before. Not even me. He opened it like a holy relic. Ella watched his face go pale as he flipped through the ledger, scanned the tapes, ran the fingerprints off the reels. Oh my God, he whispered. This isn't just Royce. This is everyone. Names from 10 years ago, international transfers, dossiers. Daniel leaned over his shoulder. We leak it, all of it. Zane shook his head. We can't just leak this. The wrong people will kill us before it hits daylight. We've already started. The stories are rolling. This finishes it. No, Zane said. This starts it. You don't get it. This doesn't just take Royce down. This cracks the spine of every major black market from here to Dubai. Elle stood frozen, staring at a photo pinned to the inside of one reel case. It was a girl, 13, wearing her dress, the one Elle had worn the day they first brought her in, pink with blue stars. She hadn't seen that dress in 15 years, but it still made her lungs collapse. She turned and walked straight out of the cabin. Daniel followed her into the trees. He found her by a river, hunched over, dry heaving. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just waited. When she finally stood upright, she said, he did it again, to someone else. Daniel's voice was hoarse. You couldn't have stopped it. You were a child. Elle turned to him, and in the moonlight her face looked carved from stone. I'm not a child anymore. The next morning, they began. Zane coordinated a triple wave drop, encrypted files to trusted journalists, hard, copies to selected law enforcement allies, and an anonymous manifesto uploaded to every public forum and mirror site on the web. They didn't try to hide, didn't bother. Let him come, Elle thought, let him try. By 10 a.m., 3 senators had resigned. By noon, a private plane registered to Royce Holden exploded mid-takeoff at a rural airstrip in Montana. No confirmed casualties, no confirmed passengers, just smoke and ash. Elle watched the footage in silence. Daniel stood behind her. You think he was on it? She shook her head. He's too careful, too proud. That was his way of disappearing. Zane muttered, he's not gone. He's just changing shape. That night, the power at the cabin flickered once, then died. Zane cursed, pulled up the backup generator. Then the satellite uplink went down. Then every screen in the cabin went black, except one. The far monitor glowed blue. And then his face filled the screen. Royce Holden, older now, hair grayer. But his eyes, those eyes hadn't changed. Cold, precise, dead behind the glass. Hello, my darlings, he said, voice like oil slick on water. Ella's fists clenched. Daniel moved toward the power switch, but Zane raised a hand. No, let him talk, Royce smiled. I see you've been busy unraveling the empire, digging through my bones. How daring. Elle stepped forward. You lost. No, Royce said. I evolved. You think this all dies with me? You think sunlight sterilizes rot? I am not the disease, Elle. I'm just the first symptom. Daniel's voice was low. You're finished, Royce leaned closer to the camera. "You have no idea what you've set loose." The screen went dark. A second later, every drone on Zane's wall activated at once, whirring, clicking, spinning their rotors like a swarm of hornets. Zane yanked the power cables. Silence fell. Ella whispered, "He's coming here." "No," Zane said, "he's already watching." They set fire to the cabin an hour later, not out of fear, but strategy. They wiped it clean, took only what they could carry. The tapes, the ledger, the drives. They fled into the mountains. Elle didn't ask where they were going. She only asked, "What do we do when we find him?" Daniel answered without hesitation, "We bury him." Snow was falling sideways. The wind cut through the trees like razors as they climbed the back trail to the next safe house. It was a small hunting cabin buried in the White Mountains, half forgotten, even by Zane's records. No power lines, no roads, just trees, snow, and the creak of frozen timber groaning under its own weight. Ella could barely feel her fingers. She hadn't slept in 36 hours, and her body was paying the price. Every step was slower, every breath a chore, but she refused to stop moving. If she stopped, she might remember the girl's face again. The dress, the number in the ledger beside her name. Daniel pushed open the cabin door with his shoulder and swept the inside quickly. Gun first, heart second. Empty. He turned back to Elle. "We're good." She nodded and stepped inside. The cabin was bare bones, a stove, a cot, a rusting water pump, but it was enough for now. They had the iron box hard drives wrapped in insulated cloth, buried in snow beneath the floorboards to stay cold and protected. Zane had gone dark temporarily to bounce locations and reset their digital trail. Ellie peeled off her wet coat and sat near the stove while Daniel got a fire going. The room slowly filled with the scent of burning pine and wet wool. Finally, she broke the silence. How many more girls? Daniel didn't pretend not to know. What she meant, he stared into the fire. Hundreds, maybe more. I keep thinking about the ones still out there, the ones who never got found. Daniel looked at her, eyes shadowed. "We found one, and she's sleeping in your niece's room, drawing rabbits with galaxy eyes." Elle gave a weak smile. "Yeah, that night, she dreamed of fire again, but this time, she wasn't chained. She was holding the key, and Royce was the one screaming. When she woke, Daniel was already dressed and loading gear. "Zane just pinged us," he said. "A source came forward, claimed to have a location, Royce's final retreat. A place he built in the desert, underground, off-grid, Arizona." Elle's eyes narrowed. "Of course he'd go underground. He's banking on us not being able to follow." "Well," she said, standing, "he's wrong. They flew out, on fake IDs 3 hours later, renting an old 4Runner and driving for nearly a day through sand and scrub. The desert stretched in every direction like some ancient cracked skin." Ella stared out the window. "I used to think revenge would feel heavy." Daniel glanced over. "And now," she turned to him, "now it feels like air. Like I've been holding my breath since I was 13. He didn't say anything, just reached over and laced his fingers through hers. The desert sun bled out by dusk, and they arrived at the edge of what looked like an abandoned mining site, corrugated metal huts half swallowed by dust, a rusted elevator shaft surrounded by old fencing. Nothing moved. Zane's voice crackled over the secure line in their earpieces. "He's there. My thermal satellite picked up 3 heat signatures underground. No signal emissions. Whoever's with him, they're on analog gear. It's like a Cold War bunker." "Entrance?" Daniel asked. "Main shaft. Probably booby-trapped. But I can't confirm from up here." Ella scanned the area. "We go in. Tonight?" Daniel nodded. "We end this." Before they descended, Elle opened the iron box case and pulled out one thing, the photo of the girl in her old dress. She tucked it into her coat pocket just over her heart. "I want him to see her, face before he dies." The climb down the shaft was almost vertical, rusted ladders and dangling cables guiding them into darkness. The air grew cooler with each rung, the silence pressing in. At the bottom, a steel door, recently used. Daniel glanced at her. "Once, we're in, there's no turning back," Ella smirked. "Wasn't planning on it." They pushed the door open. Inside was something out of a dystopian nightmare. Concrete corridors lit by flickering industrial bulbs, surveillance monitors mounted like sentinels, wires snaking along the floor. The walls were lined with sealed rooms, cells maybe, storage, God knew what else. They moved silently, sweeping each hall. And then a voice. From nowhere. From everywhere. "Elle," it whispered through the intercom, distorted. "You came home." She froze. Daniel aimed upward, tracking the speakers. Royce again. "Do you remember what I told you the night you tried to run? That pain rewrites the soul." Ella kept walking. "You were wrong." "Was I?" "And yet here you are, digging up graves, carrying my dead with you like relics." They reached the control room. Daniel kicked the door in, and there he was, Royce Holden, standing behind glass, older but still, polished, as if his crimes were just smudges he could wipe away with a handkerchief. Two armed guards stood near him, motionless, watching. Ella raised her gun, but Royce smiled. "Shoot me and you martyr me. Let me show you something instead." He pressed a button on the wall. One of the glass cells slid open. Inside was a girl, 16 maybe, pale, shivering. Ella gasped. "She's like you," Royce said calmly. "Untouched, full of potential." Daniel grabbed Elle's wrist. "He's baiting you." Elle lowered her gun, trembling. "You haven't changed. You're still just a parasite." Royce's eyes flared. "I gave you purpose, Elle. Without me, you were nothing. I made you valuable." "No," she said. "You made me dangerous." She raised the gun again. This time, she aimed lower at the control panel and fired. Sparks exploded. Alarms wailed. Daniel shot the guards before they could move. Royce lunged, but not toward them, toward a lever on the far wall. Daniel yelled, "He's rigging!" Too late. The floor shook beneath them. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Automated voice counting down from 180 seconds. Royce grinned through the glass. "If I go, I take it all with me." Elle stared at him, heart racing. Then she looked at the girl in the cell and sprinted. Daniel covered her as she broke the glass, pulled the girl into her arms. Royce screamed, pounding the wall. "You don't get to save her. You don't get to rewrite the ending." Elle didn't look back. She ran, up the shaft, through fire and smoke, out into the cold desert air with the girl gasping in her arms. They hit the sand as the ground behind them roared. The bunker collapsed in on itself. Gone. Royce Holden. Gone. Ella lay in the dust, holding the girl tight. Daniel collapsed beside them. The girl whispered, "Thank you." Ella held her tighter. "You're safe now." For the first time in her life, she believed it. The desert was still burning behind them. Even from half a mile away, Elle could feel the heat licking at her back, an angry reminder of the empire that had finally collapsed into ash. The bunker had been swallowed whole, vanishing like a secret that refused to rot quietly. There were no sirens, no news helicopters, no one coming to investigate. That was the kind of place Royce built, where no one asked questions because no one dared. They stood at the edge of the rise, Daniel's arm looped tightly around Ella's shoulders, the girl clinging to her side. Sand clung to their skin. The wind howled over the empty land like it, too, was gasping for breath. "Is he really dead?" the girl asked softly. Daniel didn't answer right away. Ella looked into the girl's eyes that looked too much, like her own, back when she still believed monsters only lived in bedtime stories. "Yeah," she said finally, "he's dead. And if he's not, he'll never walk free again." The girl's name was Mia. She didn't remember her parents. barely remembered how long she'd been underground. But she remembered one thing with perfect clarity: Royce's voice. Ella flinched when Mia repeated it aloud. The tone, the cadence, the poison, wrapped in polished words. "He used to call me Petal," Mia whispered. "Said I had to bloom. For him." Elle's stomach turned. Daniel stepped forward, crouched in front of Mia. "You don't ever have to hear that again. He's gone. You're safe now. You're free." Mia looked between them. "Are you?" The question lingered. Freedom was a strange word, sweet and fragile, and somehow heavier than chains. They got back on the road, cutting west, driving through the skeleton of America's forgotten highways. Zane had gone silent again, part of the protocol to keep them off-grid. But Daniel wasn't worried. They had what they needed: a thumb drive with the rest of Royce's secrets, one final copy. Zane had burned and split into fragments across secure locations. They'd made sure of it. Royce's legacy would never crawl out of its grave again. Ella rode in the back with Mia, letting the girl sleep with her head in her lap. Daniel drove without speaking, his fingers drumming a restless beat on the steering wheel. The silence between them wasn't tension, it was gravity, the kind that pulled all the pieces down after the storm passed. At a gas station outside Barstow, they stopped for water and fuel. Mia wandered the aisles of the convenience store in awe, pointing at candy bars like they were gold. Ella bought her 5. In the parking lot, Daniel leaned against the car, watching her through the windshield. "You okay?" she asked him. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "We did it," he said. "We really did it." Ella stood beside him, both of them staring off into the endless cracked horizon. "You think it's over?" she asked. Daniel turned to her. "No, but I think he's over, and that's enough for me." They checked into a small roadside motel that night. 1 room, 2 beds. Ella let Mia pick which one she wanted. Daniel stepped out to make a final secure call to Zane. When he came back, his expression had changed. "What?" Ella asked. Daniel hesitated. Then, Zane traced the last unsecured drop site. Someone else accessed it before the protocol finished. Elle's spine stiffened. "Who?" "He doesn't know. Could be a journalist, could be a buyer, could be a ghost." Elle sat down slowly. "You think Royce planned for this?" "I think he planted fail-safes we didn't find. Backup plans, offshoots." Her voice lowered. "You think this isn't over?" Daniel's silence said everything. Mia was already asleep, curled under a blanket, clutching a small stuffed rabbit the motel staff had found in their lost-and-found box. Ella watched her chest rise and fall, her little fingers tangled in the toy's worn ears. "Then we keep going," she said, "until every trace of him is gone." Daniel nodded. "We won't stop, not until there's nothing left of the world." He built. They spent the next week in motion, changing cars, switching routes, wiping digital footprints. Each day they got closer to a place where Mia could be safe, really safe. Elle wasn't sure what that looked like. Maybe a private foster placement through Zane's back channels, maybe with her sister, who had already begun asking questions about Mia's story, offering quiet support without prying. On the 8th day, they reached a cabin in Oregon, tucked in a forest so dense even the stars felt private. Zane met them there. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but his grin was real. "She's beautiful," he said, crouching in front of Mia. The girl beamed. "You're the computer guy," he laughed. "Guilty." Inside the cabin, Zane pulled Elle aside. "There's something you need to see." He led her to a laptop, opened a video file. No title, just a timestamp from 3 days ago. It was a recording. Royce's voice again, but older, weaker, possibly recorded before the final confrontation. "If you're watching this," he said, "then you've succeeded. You've killed me, and I don't care." Elle leaned in, teeth clenched. But understand this, El, I was never just one man. I was a door, and now that it's open, you can't close it again. Others will come, others like me, maybe worse. The screen went black. Zane closed the lid. You sure you want to keep this fight going? He asked. Ella stared at the empty screen. Yes. She walked back to Mia, kissed the girl's forehead, and turned to Daniel. We teach her, she said. We train her to never need rescuing again. Daniel took her hand. Then let's build her a world worth fighting for. The rain in Oregon was different. It didn't slam like the storms back east. It whispered. It blanketed. It felt like a lullaby the world had forgotten how to sing until you stood still long enough to hear it. Elle stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the rain slide off the eaves, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone. Cold. Inside, Mia was sprawled across the floor, sketching wild, whimsical creatures, half rabbit, half galaxy. Daniel was helping her name each one. Star Bunny, Nebulinx, Moonfox. A strange, gentle rhythm had started to settle over them. Zane stayed for 2 days before disappearing back into his web of shadows. He left behind a burner phone and a new file, a red folder marked Sleeper Cells Pending. Inside were names, coordinates, flagged shipping containers, surveillance, stills from border crossings. The world's bigger than Royce, he said before he left. He was just one root of a tree we didn't plant. If you want out, I get it. But if you want in, really in, I'll be here. Elle didn't answer right away. She just hugged him. Daniel spent his mornings with Mia, teaching her how to hold a compass, how to build a fire. Elle joined in the afternoons, running drills, showing her how to read danger in people's eyes. They taught her how to move quietly, how to trust herself, how to fight if she had to. One night, around the fire pit behind the cabin, Mia asked the question that cracked them all open. Will I always be broken? Ella looked at her for a long time before answering. You're not broken. You were hurt, and hurt things heal. Mia's voice trembled. But sometimes I still feel him. Daniel reached across the fire, took her hand gently. Feeling him doesn't mean he owns you, it means you survived him. Elle added, and you'll survive what comes next too. Mia nodded slowly. Her eyes were still glassy, but her shoulders lifted, just slightly, like something inside her had loosened. The next morning, Ella opened the red folder. She spread the papers across the table and began sorting through them like puzzle pieces. Every girl they saved would be another weight off her soul. Every name she scratched out would be another night a child didn't cry in a locked room. Daniel joined her. He didn't ask. He just sat beside her and started sorting. They didn't speak much in those hours, just pointed, scanned, flagged. A new rhythm. One night, weeks later, Mia woke screaming. Eld was at her side in seconds, arms wrapping tight. The girl trembled so hard she couldn't speak. It wasn't until Daniel flicked the hallway light that Ella saw the blood. Mia had dug her fingernails into her own palms. Deep. She was still half asleep, caught in some dream she couldn't shake. Ella pressed her hands flat, whispering over and over, "You're safe. You're safe. You're safe." Mia blinked through tears. He was there, in the trees. He was smiling. Daniel stood behind them, fists clenched. That night, they burned the photo, the one Elle had carried in her coat just over her heart, the one with the girl in the dress from Royce's ledger. It had done its job. Now it was just a ghost. The fire snapped and hissed as the edges curled and blackened. Mia watched it go. When the final ember died, she whispered, "He's not in my dreams anymore." From that day forward, the cabin became more than a hideout. It became a sanctuary. Ella planted lavender along the porch, something her mother used to do back in Maine. Daniel built a greenhouse out of old windows they salvaged from a junkyard 3 towns over. Mia painted murals on the inside walls, creatures made of stars, forests that reached past the ceiling. They built something, and slowly the world stopped feeling like a battlefield. One morning, Mia handed Elle a drawing. It was of 3 figures, one tall, one strong, one small with curls like ink spirals. They were standing on a cliff. Behind them was a rising sun. "You think we'll ever feel normal?" Mia asked. Ella didn't lie. "I don't know, but I think we'll feel real." Mia smiled. "That's enough." Then came the day Zane returned. It had been 3 months. He looked leaner, harder, but his eyes were sharp. "There's movement," he said. "The last cell Royce activated? They've gone rogue. No central leadership, just chaos." Elle nodded slowly. "And?" Zane pulled a thumb drive from his coat. "They have girls, young ones, moving them through cargo lines in Florida." Daniel didn't hesitate. "We go." Elle looked at Mia. The girl stared back, fearless. "I'm not staying behind," she said. Elle knelt beside her. "You won't go into danger, but you'll come with us. Okay?" Mia nodded. "Okay." Zane raised an eyebrow. "You're building something dangerous, you know." Elle stood. "No, I'm building something unstoppable." Florida didn't welcome them with sunshine. It greeted them with humidity so thick it felt like they were breathing through wool and eyes that watched too long from unmarked cars. Elle knew the signs. Too many years spent unraveling corporate secrets had taught her the language of shadows. They were in Miami by midnight. Zane had secured a safe house in a worn-down neighborhood tucked behind a graffiti-covered laundromat. Inside, 3 rooms, blackout curtains, weapons stashed beneath floorboards, and a whiteboard already loaded with notes. Daniel swept the space first, checking vents, crawl spaces, the roof. Ella kept Mia close. Zane unfolded a city map across the kitchen table. Red pins marked 6 locations. "Shipping hubs," he said. "Unregistered. Surveillance cams cut. Nightly between 2 and 4 a.m. Last satellite ping tracked a shipment labeled as refrigeration units. Too heavy, too cold, and only moving at night." Elle stared at one pin in particular, Terminal 4. "The docks." Zane nodded. "That's the one." They didn't rush, not this time. Royce had been fast, brutal. This needed to be smarter. They watched the terminal for 3 days, shift rotations, delivery schedules. The pattern became clear. Every 3rd night, a truck left with cargo that never got logged. No paperwork, no record, just silence. On the 4th night, they moved. Daniel took point. Ella ran comms. Zane operated surveillance from a van parked 2 blocks out, satellite uplink humming in the dark. Mia stayed behind, hidden beneath the floorboards of the safe house, with a walkie and 3 exits memorized. They breached at 2:14 a.m., no alarms. Inside, the terminal smelled of salt and something colder, like frozen steel and chlorine. It wasn't just a shipping yard, it was a vault. Behind the 3rd container row, they found the truck, running, lights on, the back door chained and padlocked. Elle's heart dropped. It was too familiar. Daniel didn't speak, he just moved. Bolt. Cutters in one hand, pistol in the other. The lock snapped. The door creaked open. Inside, 5 girls, shivering, eyes wide with animal terror, duct tape still on their wrists. Elle stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "We're here to get you out. You're safe now." The oldest, maybe, 16, looked past her shoulder. "He's still here." Elle froze. Before she could turn, the shot rang out. Daniel tackled her down. The bullet cracked overhead. Another zipped past, ricocheting off the metal siding. "Sniper!" Zane barked over comms. "Rooftop! Northwest Tower!" Ella scrambled, pulled the girls from the truck one by one, shoving them toward cover. Daniel returned fire, short bursts, precise. Zane rerouted street cams, called in a burner tip to local PD under a fake ID. They had 5 minutes, maybe less. Another shot, another scream. Ella turned in time to see the sniper drop from the tower, Zane's drone strike hitting clean. Silence. Then, sirens. Daniel looked to her. "Go, I'll cover you." She shook her head. Together. They moved as one. The girls stumbled, barefoot and cold, through the shadows, guided by Zane's voice in their ears, down alleys, over fences, through the emergency extraction path he'd mapped out days before. By the time the cops stormed the terminal, all they found was an empty truck and a trail of shell casings. Back at the safe house, Mia launched herself into Elle's arms. "You came back," she whispered. Elle held her tight. "Always." Zane's hands trembled as he downloaded the surveillance data. "They're fragmenting, fast. That wasn't a structured op. That was desperation." Daniel nodded. "They know we're coming." Elle looked around the room, at the rescued. Girls wrapped in blankets, drinking hot chocolate, blinking against the shock. One of them smiled at Mia. "We need more help," Elle said quietly. Zane leaned against the wall. "I know a guy. Former Air Force. Blew the whistle on a trafficking ring in Kandahar. They buried him, but he's still breathing, barely." "Bring him in." Daniel stepped forward. "And I have contacts in Bogota. They've been tracking similar routes through the Pacific." The safe house wasn't a house anymore. It was headquarters. Ella handed Mia a small notebook. "New mission," she said gently. Mia flipped it open. "What is it?" "Code names," Elle said. "You get to name everyone we save. Give them something new, something clean." Mia smiled. "Starbird, Luma, Junie, Sol." Names spilled like magic from her mouth. Names no man would ever erase again. That night, Elle couldn't sleep. She stood on the roof, watching the city hum and throb with neon breath. Daniel joined her, a quiet silhouette. "She's changing," he said softly. "So are we." They stood in silence. Below them, 5 girls slept in safety. 1 girl drew stars in her notebook, and 3 ghosts watched from the edge of the dark. Royce and the men just like him. "You think we'll ever run out of them?" Daniel asked. Elle's jaw tightened. "No," she said, "but we'll never run out of fire either." The fire didn't die. It evolved. 1 week after the Miami extraction, Zane's network lit up with chatter, encrypted signals, frantic movements, flagged financial trails. It was like smashing open a hornet's nest. Every cell that had once fed off Royce's empire was now in chaos, trying to stay hidden, trying to survive. But now they had a new name. Not Royce. Elle. It started with whispers online, encrypted forums, dark web message boards. "She's burning it all down. The chainbreaker. The bride who survived." Some mocked it. Others warned each other. But a few asked how to help. Zane showed her the data. "You're a signal flare," he said. "People are watching, listening, waiting." Elle didn't know how to feel. She hadn't wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to make sure girls like Mia didn't rot behind steel doors. But symbols, like fires, didn't always ask permission before they caught wind. Daniel was the one who pushed the next move. "We go public," he said. "Not with our names, but with what we've seen, what we have. There are people who can't fight with fists, but they can fund, they can write, they can witness." Elle was hesitant, but then she looked at Mia, asleep on the couch beside a rescued girl named Sul. The 2 of them curled around each other like twin fawns who'd finally found a clearing in the woods. "We do it," Elle said. "We do it loud." So they built a site. Zane handled the firewalls. Daniel compiled reports, names, aliases, corporate front groups. Elle wrote the manifesto, raw, unpolished, full of fury. "We are not victims. We are not survivors. We are fire, and we are coming." They launched it on a Thursday. By Friday, it had been shared 1,000 times. By Saturday, the mirror sites were already spreading in 12 languages. Survivors started submitting tips, coded. Messages, photos of suspicious docks, locations of known traffickers, confessions from women who once worked the books. A war was starting, but this time Elle wasn't alone. One message in particular caught her attention. No sender, just a string of numbers and a location. Denver, Colorado. Elle recognized the numbers. Ledger IDs, girls, 4 of them, all marked, as cleared for distribution under Royce's system. She stared at the screen, pulse quickening. Daniel read over her shoulder. A trap? Maybe, Elle said. But if it's not... She didn't finish the sentence. They left that night. Zane stayed behind in Miami to coordinate remote teams and reinforce the safe house. Mia begged to go with them. Ella said no. Mia didn't scream or cry. She just handed Elle a folded piece of paper and whispered, "Bring them back." The drawing was of 4 girls standing in the snow, holding hands. Elle kept it in her pocket the entire flight. Denver was colder than expected. Frost clung to the edges of the windows, and the wind off the mountains was sharp enough to cut thought. They moved carefully. No rental cars, no credit cards, no names. The address led them to an abandoned strip mall. 1 unit had power. Faint. Just enough to keep a heater running and a motion sensor light flickering in the corner. Inside were 4 girls, and something else. A man. He was tied to a chair, hands zip-tied behind his back, nose bleeding, a note stapled to his shirt. One of Royce's. "Your turn." Elle didn't recognize him, but his eyes were full of that same hollow certainty, that same belief that the world would always bend for men like him. She stepped closer. "You ran a cell." He smiled through bloody teeth. "I built a kingdom." Daniel stepped in, gun raised. "Then meet the queen." Elle didn't flinch. "Where are the others?" The man just grinned. "All over. They'll outlast you, like we always do." Elle reached down, pulled the paper from her pocket. The drawing. She showed it to him. "These 4 girls," she said softly, "are going to grow up. They're going to walk free, and they will never speak your name." His grin wavered. She nodded to Daniel. They left him there, anonymous, let the cold and the silence take him. No headlines, no fame, just erasure. They brought the girls back by back roads, wrapped in thrifted coats, fingers tangled together. Mia was waiting at the door when they returned. One look at the girls, and she smiled radiant. "You found them." Ella knelt down. "They were waiting for us." That night, all 8 girls slept in the same room. Blankets covering the floor, soft music playing, a single nightlight glowing in the corner. Ella stood in the doorway for a long time, watching them breathe. Daniel stepped behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked. She leaned into him. "Only when I think about the ones we haven't found yet." Zane walked in, holding a new phone. He looked grim. "You need to see this," he said. On the screen, a message, coordinates, a name, a photo of a girl in chains. Royce's last broker, the last loose thread. Ella's blood turned to ice. "We end it," she said, and this time none of them flinched. The last thread always phrased the deepest. Elle couldn't stop staring at the photo. The girl looked no older than Mia had been when she first pulled her from that burning car. Same hollow eyes, same bruised innocence, same silent scream embedded in every part of her body language. But this wasn't just about saving another girl. This was about finishing it. According to Zane, the broker's name was K.L. Remy, an ex-diplomatic transport specialist who'd vanished from the system 10 years prior. Royce had used him to clean the dirtiest jobs, extractions, reassignments, disposals. If Royce was the brain, Kyle was the knife. Zane's intel placed him in a compound deep in northern Nevada, masquerading as a rehabilitation center for troubled teens. "How do we get in?" Daniel asked. Zane tapped a blueprint onto the table. "You're not going to like it." The facility was lined with surveillance, thermal, motion, and biometric. The only weakness was a supply run scheduled every Thursday morning at 4 a.m., handled by a logistics team with forged Department of Health credentials. We can intercept the van, take their IDs, Zane explained. You'll have 15 minutes from check-in to breach the dorms. After that, all hell breaks loose. Good, Elle said. I want hell. 3 days later, they moved. The desert air felt like static, dry, unrelenting. They wore scrub uniforms, carried fake clipboards, and entered through the service gate, escorted by a sleepy guard more interested in his coffee than checking badge holograms. Inside, the place was pristine. Too pristine. Sterile white walls, laminated posters of smiling teens, empty hallways, no sound, no color, only locked doors, each labeled with numbers instead of names. Elle moved first, counting silently. Her pulse was steady now. This wasn't panic anymore. It was purpose. Room 208. She used the master key Zane had replicated from a scanned photo. The lock clicked. Inside was the girl, chained to a bed, drugged, thin, eyes blinking slowly like she was underwater. Ella ran to her. "We're here," she whispered. "You're going to be okay." The girl didn't respond, but a tear slid down her cheek. Daniel covered the door. 3 minutes. Elle picked the lock on the ankle restraints and lifted the girl into her arms. "You're not staying here another second." But the second she stepped into the hallway, the alarm blared. Kyle Remy had been watching. He appeared on the security monitors, smiling, holding a microphone. "You made it!" "Finally!" Zane's voice snapped over comms. "Pull out! All exits just locked. They're funneling you to the east wing." Daniel cursed. "It's a kill box." "No," Elle said. "It's a stage." She turned to Daniel. "Trust me." He nodded. No hesitation. They moved fast, through the hallways, ducking behind corners as armed guards closed in. Ella carried the girl like she weighed nothing. Daniel took out 2 men silently, reclaimed their weapons, handed one to her. They reached the east wing. Kyle was waiting. He stood beside a glass wall with 3 more girls inside, cuffed, watching. "You think this ends with me?" he called out. "You think Royce was the top? He was a gear. I'm the lever." Elle didn't flinch. "Then I'll snap it." Kyle raised a pistol to one of the girls' heads. "Don't," Elle warned. "Or what? You'll shoot me? You'll kill your last lead?" She stepped forward. "No," she said quietly. "She will." The girl in her arms stirred. Her eyes opened, slow, focused. Kyle's smirk faltered. The girl whispered, "I'm not broken." Ella lowered her gently. The girl stood on her own, and before Kyle could react, she lunged. She bit his hand, hard, and shoved him backward. He fired, but missed. Daniel shot once, clean into the leg. Kyle screamed and dropped. The girls in the glass room banged on the window. Zane's voice returned. "Security override disabled. Doors are opening. Now." Elle smashed the glass with the butt of her rifle. Shards rained down like glittering ash. The girls ran out, straight into her arms. Sirens wailed. Outside, a backup van waited, driven by a woman Elle had only seen, in encrypted files. Another survivor, another spark. They piled in. Ella turned back just once and met Kyle's eyes as he bled out on the floor. "Royce sends his regards," she said. Then she slammed the door shut. By the time they hit the highway, the compound was on fire. Literally. Zane had activated a failsafe. "We needed the records gone," he said, "and I figured you'd appreciate the symmetry." Daniel held Elle's hand the whole drive back. The rescued girls slept, heads on each other's shoulders. The girl Ella had carried stirred again. "What's your name?" she asked. Ella looked at her. "Doesn't matter," she said. "What matters is yours." The girl smiled faintly. "I think I want to be called Nova." Mia ran out to greet them when they arrived. She said nothing. She just hugged Nova tightly and didn't let go. That night, they sat around the fire behind the safe house. All of them, 10 girls, 3 warriors, 1 burning legacy. Zane raised a glass. To the ones we found, to the ones still waiting, and to the fire that never stops. They all echoed it. To the fire. Elle watched the flames rise and fall, casting shadows that danced like memories. She knew it wasn't over, but for the first time, the weight didn't crush her. It carried her, because she wasn't alone anymore. She had a family, she had a mission, and she had fire. The next morning dawned silent. No sirens, no coded messages, no shouts in the dark, just birdsong and breath. Elle stood on the roof of the safe house, barefoot, watching the first pink smudge of sunrise paint the sky above Miami. It felt almost like peace. Almost. Behind her, the world stirred. Girls waking slowly, wrapped in borrowed blankets and each other's warmth. Daniel brewing coffee below. Zane already typing away in the corner, scrubbing every trace of their recent operation from the net. But something had changed. Royce was gone. Cale was gone. The syndicate was splintered. Not dead, not yet, but bleeding. And for the first time since Elle had kicked the door open on her own cage, she felt the power of momentum. She came downstairs, quietly. Mia was already up, drawing again, surrounded by the others. They called her Captain now, half joking, half true. She gave every rescued girl a name, a code, a purpose. Today's were Halo, Pyra, Echo, and Nova. Mia looked up and smiled. "They want to help," she said. "They want to do what you do." Elle crouched down. "That's not a small thing," Mia shrugged. "Neither is a fire." The other girls laughed, light, airy, like the first wind after a storm. Later that afternoon they voted. A name. For the network. For the movement. Something that couldn't be taken from them. They debated in whispers and scribbles and ideas on napkins, until one of the girls, Starbird, stood and said softly, "We don't need to name ourselves after pain. Let's name ourselves after the fact that we survived it." The others nodded, and so they called themselves Emberline, a thread of fire, a signal flare, a promise. Zane began registering domains. Daniel mapped contacts across 5 continents. Survivors who had once cowered in silence were now asking to join. Ella didn't issue commands. She didn't need to. She just made space. Space for Sul to help design training modules for new arrivals, for Nova to coordinate the next mission in Colombia, for Mia to run a mentorship program she called Kindred Sparks, and slowly the safe house evolved into something more. A sanctuary, a school, a headquarters, a family. Daniel came to her one night while she sat on the back porch, watching fireflies blink like coded messages in the dusk. "You could stop now," he said gently. "You've earned that. We could go somewhere quiet. Give Mia a real childhood." Elle didn't look at him, just watched the blinking lights. "I think she has one now," she said. He took her hand. "And you?" she smiled faintly. "I don't need quiet. I just need purpose." Behind them, laughter drifted from the open windows. Music, joy, all the sounds Elle once believed she'd never hear again. She stood, laced her fingers with his. "I'll never stop fighting," she said. "But now I'm fighting with something, not just against." "Us," Daniel said. "Us," Elle agreed. That night, she wrote a letter. Not to anyone specific, just to the world. She didn't post it. Not yet. Maybe never. But it went like this. To the girl in the cage, to the boy too scared to speak, to the one who thinks no one sees you. We do. We hear you. We are coming. A week later, the first Emberline satellite team rescued a dozen girls from a compound in Tunisia. 2 days after that, a judge in Oregon cited Elle's leaked files to authorize a full criminal investigation into a Fortune 500 executive with links to Royce. By month's end, Emberline had 32 safe houses worldwide, and a motto, Not printed, not spoken, burned into every heart they saved. We are fire, and fire does not forget. So many stories end with rescue. But what happens after the door is kicked open? After the chains fall? After the fire burns through the last lock? This story wasn't just about a single dad, a CEO, or a bride found in a burning car. It was about what happens when survival turns into resistance, when one woman's escape lights the path for hundreds. Elle didn't just live, she built something. For Mia, for the girls lost and forgotten, for herself, and for every person who ever thought the world had forgotten them. There are still syndicates out there, still monsters in suits, still children hidden behind walls labeled treatment, discipline, obedience. But there's also Emberline, and fire spreads faster than fear. So maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's just a spark. If this story moved you, if it cracked something open, don't let it end here. Share it, carry it, pass it on. You never know who's still trapped, who's still waiting, and who just needs to hear the words, "We're coming, we're coming."